What's up, Liron here. Today I'm going to teach you one of my favorite exercises for watercolor painting. What's up, Liron here. Thank you for joining me in another video. And as I mentioned, today I'm going to teach you a watercolor painting exercise that I find to be really useful, and it's called the values exercise. This is basically creating a value scale from light to dark. The same thing that's done using pencil usually, and pen or pen and ink even, is done here in watercolor. And this exercise has so many benefits. It improves your perception of values. It improves your technique, your ability to lift and to charge and to do many things. And on top of that, as an added bonus, it makes you more familiar with the paints you have and that you're using. So you can figure out what the range of value is for example, Carbazole Violet, or for Indian Yellow, or for Sap Green, any of these paints, okay? So just a quick note before we begin, this is a good chance to use all of the paints you don't use as much, that you find yourself not using too much, just to practice, or even just that mixture, that weird dry paint that you have left on your palette from the previous painting. This is a really good chance to use these, okay? But if you do want to become familiar with your particular colors, keep it fresh and pure like I did. So in any case, let me show you how I do this one. Okay, so here's how this exercise will work. I'm going to talk a bit and then we're going to start doing it, and I'm going to explain while I'm doing it. So I've got a table here, and this will be moving from light to dark. And I have three paints that I decided to choose, and the reason I decided them is for demonstration purposes and for my own sake. I wanted to choose three colors that actually have a different range of values. So the Carbazole Violet can get really dark. The Sap Green is a little lighter, I believe, and the Indian Yellow is lighter. It's a yellow. Yellows tend to be a little lighter, despite it being a bit of an orangey yellow. But still, this will allow us to get a large range of values and to practice this. So what we're basically doing is the value scale exercise, and many people do that when sketching with pencil or even pen, and our goal is to get a transition from light to dark. This is going to be the lightest value we can produce, so the most watered down version of the paint, and this one's going to be the darkest. So I'm going to start with Sap Green, and as I work on this, I will talk more about what I think is the essence of this exercise and why it's so important. So we're going to start just with a very pale wash, and this is basically as pale as you can get. Each color can get very light, you just have to water it down enough, but not all colors and paints can get dark. So this is why I like to choose personally colors that have a wide range of values, that can actually achieve a very dark value as well, and this because I find them useful. Okay, so now I filled in this first swatch with a very watered down wash. It could be even more watered down. I could grab some more water. I have a bucket here. Let me show you right here. So I could grab a little more water and further water down this wash and make it even lighter. But for this demonstration's sake, it's okay. What we're trying to get is a transition. Now, what you could do is start adding a little more paint to it, a little more paint, and end up here. But I want us to figure out the full range here. So I want to figure out what the darkest is and then fill in the blanks later on. So let's mix a very thick mixture of Sap Green. Now, I think there is a major insight to learn from this. And many times when you learn from tutorials, whether it's on YouTube or you're actually taking a class with a teacher, you tend to look at the paper. And my lesson to you from this particular exercise is this is where you want to look, at the palette. You want to see what the artist is doing with the palette itself. You want to see how much water does he add, how much pigment does he mix in. And this is really important to notice these things, because this is where, funny enough, most of the painting actually occurs, okay? On paper is the result, but the result encapsulates a lot of mixing time and calculating and figuring out what color you want to achieve. Okay, so this is really important, and I really want to stress this. When you're learning from someone, this is also where you want to be observing, not just what they're doing on paper. So a word or two about my workspace right now. I have this test paper here. I have a paper towel, and you want to pay attention to what I'm doing with the paper, just a towel, not a paper towel. You want to notice what I'm doing with this one as well. Okay, so I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit here because I don't want this to be a super slow video. And now I have a bit of a stronger wash, and I can test it on my test paper and see how it compares to the previous one. Okay, so I feel like it could be watered down ever so slightly again. And hopefully I was right. I just put my finger into the sap green. Hopefully I was right. And this will give us something that's a little darker than the first one. You know what? I'm going to add a bit more paint to it. And that's fine if I mess it up. I'm actually not warmed up. This is actually my warm-up, okay? So, by the way, they aren't supposed to necessarily touch one another, okay? I'm going to keep a gap here just to make sure they don't mix too much in the next few ones. But if you want to, you can have them touch. That's just, you know, it's just an exercise. You're meant to just do this as a warm-up or to improve your value perception. Okay, so now we have the next swatch. For the next one, I'm going to add in even more paint, okay? And we're trying to get to a gradual move from light to dark, okay? With this as our guide for the darkest possibility. And now for the next swatch, and remember, watercolor dries a little lighter than it appears. So you want to take that into consideration. So when I put down this wash, it looked really much darker than it actually is. And you may have thought, oh, you could water it down a little more. And I could, but then again, some of it disappears with the water, okay? So we have this one as well. And this is actually a good exercise for figuring out your weakness or your weak spot when it comes to value dispersion. So now you temporarily see a little less from my palette and a little more of the paper. I'm gonna zoom back out later on. So now I'm trying to do something that's in between these two, okay? Now, what I was just mentioning is this really helps in finding your weak spot when it comes to value dispersion. So people tend to, when you're learning, you may end up in your paintings using a very light value or two very light values and not pushing the contrast dark enough, okay? And this is very common. It's a very common beginner mistake, not going dark enough when you should go darker. So that's one thing you may notice, that it's hard for you, like psychologically, to push the contrast here and to make it darker. One more thing you may notice is that you ended up going from light to dark really fast. Now here I was quite gradual, let me show you. So I'm doing fine. Dropped my water sprayer. But in any case, I'm doing fine here. It is kind of a gradual transition. I'm not too worried about the appearance, that's fine. But you do get this very light, then a little darker, then a little darker, then much more dark, and then the darkest. So I did get a gradual change, but what may end up happening is you may find out that you start really light, okay? And then on the next one, you try to go a little darker, you end up going really dark. So then you're missing the in-between. And by missing the in-between, this actually probably, or not probably, but this may happen in your paintings as well. You may not recognize that there's a middle value between these two that's more like this, let's say. It's not as light as this one, it's not as dark as this one. So you get the nuances of how dark something should be. And you can always add paint. This is the good thing about this exercise. If you think this isn't dark enough, just grab a little more paint here I'm mixing in my palette and just dab it in there. And then it turns a little darker. You see? So this is why I think this is very beneficial. So now I'm gonna zoom back out and show you the rest of the paints, and you'll see the differences. So I'll just mention that the sap green actually became darker than I expected, so I'm really impressed by it. So now we're gonna do the Carbazole violet, and with the Carbazole violet, just a touch is enough, and let me show you, just a touch is enough, and it's super dark, okay? So I'm gonna heavily water it down, and I'm actually gonna clean up my palette, what I almost never do, okay? So you get to see me in my more organized version just for you. So as we're demonstrating the different values for different colors, I do want us to see the colors in their purest or purer form at least. So now I'm picking up quite a lot of Carbazole violet, but I'm gonna water it down significantly. And we could do one where we don't fill in both edges, but just start light and then go darker and darker. So we could try that and see how we end up. So let's do that. And I'm gonna use again a very watered down. I'm gonna water it down a little more even. And remove some water from my brush and just kind of move the paint around that square, okay? So this is as light as I wanted to start here. You could start even lighter than that. Now I'm gonna pick up a little more paint, and this is gonna be tricky. I'm not putting the boundaries here. I'm just continuing and darkening things as I go along. And you may discover that you got to your darkest value too early, okay? And that'll be a problem, and then you slowly learn how to balance things out. But we're gonna try it out. It's just an exercise. I'm not under a test here or anything, and I'll probably get some of it wrong, quote unquote, okay? So I got it a little darker, and I think it's a little too dark. So what I'm gonna do is lift back some of it. And the way to do that is you just clean the brush in water, wipe it on the towel, and then lift. And the more you wipe, the more it'll lift. The more you wipe on the towel, the more it'll lift, okay? So I think this is a little darker. Maybe I even went a little too light, but that's fine. So now we're gonna move on to the next square here. We really got it, I think, to be gradual for now. Now I'm gonna push things a little darker yet again. And again, I think I went way too dark. This should be like that here. So I'm gonna lift back some of it. And you can see here, really, this is trial and error. Sometimes you'll find that doing the boundaries will really help you to figure out how dark something should be. And sometimes you really need that. So you could start with doing both edges and then filling in the middle. So now I can go pretty dark, but not completely opaque, okay? That's the thing. I want to get a lot of pigment and a rich dark value, but it's not going to be black. And now I'm going to do the black. So I'm going to pick up the paint pure and just lay it down here. Notice how it really is almost black. It's much darker than the sap green. And with the sap green, I was doing the exact same thing. I picked it up as it is from the palette without mixing anything in its purest form, and notice the difference. Okay, so now you can already tell that the Carbazole Violet can get much darker than the sap green. So another useful thing with this exercise is two more things actually. First, it teaches you the range of values for the paints that you are using or that you're gonna use. So that's really important. If you have these mixes that you keep coming back to, now you know how dark the Carbazole Violet is. So that's one thing. The second thing is that, did you see how earlier I lifted back up? The lifting action is also important because you're going to do the same thing in the painting, but now you have no pressure, you're not going to ruin anything, it's just this piece of paper, you know, it's just a random exercise we're doing, so you can feel safe to do that without too much fear. So now I'm going to move on to the yellow, and it's a bit contaminated as always, so I'm just cleaning it out. And a lot of people ask me if I'm not afraid to contaminate my yellows, and I'm like, just a few dabs of the brush and it cleans right off. And now I already got a pure paint here. Okay, so I'm not, sorry, here. So I'm not too worried about it. So now we're going to do that. So I'm going to start again with a very watered down version of the paint. Just grab a bit more of the pigment, of the pure yellow. And this time I'm going to start really light. And the reason I want to start really light is that the values for this one are probably lighter to begin with. So I want to give myself enough space to move and get the darker values, okay? So I'm going to test it out, and this is really watered down. I'm going to add just a bit more water and then apply it to the paper. And this is what we get. Once again, a very, very light yellow. I wanted to use this opportunity to thank you. In the last video I posted with the boats, well, I don't know if it's the last now because I probably published one since. In any case, the boat painting video, I got a lot of good feedback. I was worried because it's quite a long one and I was worried I'm rambling too much. So I got quite good feedback, and you said that you found what I said interesting. So I really appreciate it, and I'll try talking more. I know sometimes I tend to go a little off topic, to talk in circles sometimes. That's sorry about that, but hopefully you still enjoy the videos. And from the feedback I could gather, you do, and it is enjoyable. So I'm not gonna change my ways, and I'm happy that my natural speaking style suits you. So now you see this is a challenge because it doesn't darken a lot or a whole lot more. So I'm really trying, and this is almost as dark as it'll get, but just a little more watered down. And now I'm gonna just pick it up pure from the pan like this and lay it down as dark as it can get. And you can see here that there isn't a whole lot of difference between these two swatches, which means I probably didn't go gradual enough, but that's fine. I didn't get the borders in, I didn't, you know, we just went from left to right, so that's fine. But this is probably as dark as it'll get. So hopefully you can see why this exercise is helpful. I want to teach you another quick variation for it. And this is more if you don't necessarily want to challenge yourself, but you do want to figure out the range of values that a color has. So I'm going to just do a quick swatch here. I'm going to move a bit and then I'm going to obstruct some of the light, so you'll forgive me for a moment. So in any case, you've got this scale, okay? Now, let's say we divide it, not 5, maybe a little more this time. 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's go with 7. Okay, so now we have 7 boxes. Now what you could do, and this is again another variation of this, is you water down the paint as much as you can, okay? And you're going to do the same thing only with glazes, okay? So we're going to water it down as much as we can, and then we're just going to fill up everything, and we can even start with white, because white is the lightest value we can produce probably. So we'll start with white, and then fill everything up, okay, with this yellow. So now we've got the lightest value all across the scale. Next, what we're going to do is allow this time to dry and come back with another layer and glaze over all of the rest and leave one in the original value. You see where I'm going? So then, you know what? I'm just going to let it dry for a few moments and then I'm going to demonstrate exactly how to do this, and you'll slowly see how a scale is created. So now the paint is a little dry, and let me show you how the next step works. You just grab a mix that's a little darker than the original one, but just a little, because now remember it glazes over, so we have a transparency and you can see the bottom layer as well. So it compounds, the darkness compounds. This is something I want to talk about in a separate video, but in any case. So now you see I'm just going over all of the swatches but the left one. And they may not be 100% dry, but that's fine, just for this demonstration's sake. I'm going back with an additional wash, but I skipped just one, okay? So now I've got everything darkened but this one. And this is how you do it. Then I come back with another glaze. I'm going to do it now over it and ruin everything because it's wet and wet, but in any case, I'm not going to wait for it to dry. And then I move on to the next one, and I leave one, and I darken this side of this scale. So you see how I'm going about this. I'm doing the same thing only with glazing, okay? Let them dry for a while before you continue. And that way you can really develop the same skill, but you don't have to mix the darkness, the level of darkness you want. You can just get it by glazing over. Okay, so hopefully you find this exercise helpful. What I'm going to do now is properly wrap up this video. I hope you enjoyed this demo. Let's do this. So this is it. I really hope you enjoyed this exercise. I find it, again, helpful on so many levels. As you can see, you figure out the value range of your paints. You can figure out how to lift and how to dab even, and how to charge your washes and make them darker, make them lighter, and you practice in a safe environment and not on your painting so you don't destroy it. And you also develop your eyesight and improve your perception of how dark or light something is. And shadows do lie, and I got this comment on an Instagram post I did a while ago where I got the shadow pretty accurate, but not as accurate. And sometimes when you see a contrast between light and dark, it can look like the dark is so much darker than you think, but then you find out that it's much lighter than it actually is. Now your eye can recognize it, so when you look at a painting and it's inaccurate, even you can tell. But you can't exactly tell why. And then suddenly you see the right contrast and it's like, oh, so this is how it's supposed to look like. So in any case, this is why I find this exercise really useful. Both variations, you can do it whichever way you want. You can build upon it. And this is it. I'm really curious to hear if you think like this is something that may be helpful to you, or even better, if you tried it and found that it helped you, okay? I really want to know your feedback for that. So let me know in the comment below what you thought of this, and if you see an improvement, basically. I want to thank you so much for watching and just for listening. I really appreciate all the likes and comments and messages that I get. So thank you so much, and I will see you again in another video real soon.